What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we are back for another week.
Here we are again.
Yeah, ready to go.
That's
In
right.
the second week of this, the Gift of Empathy study that we've been working through a little bit here. And I know at staff meeting, you said that this has been a fun one to kind of work through.
It has. I think this is, I'm enjoying it, and so I think I was saying to you right before we started, I'm about halfway through this week, so I have to rewind to think about where we're going this week. We're looking at Love Comes Close, Jesus healing a leper, and so let's talk about that, shall we?
Let's do it. Let's jump in. Well, Dave, before we really get going, I have to say that I unfortunately was not in church on Sunday. I was at a youth retreat.
Right. How was that?
It was really, really good.
Nice.
It was just good to kind of get away for the weekend. And, it's always good when the kids are like, so we could stay and miss school Monday and stuff like that. So it was good. Just you
have such a good group and such a good team of volunteers. That's y'all are
so
really
fun.
in a good place right now, aren't you?
Really are.
Yeah.
Really are. I mean, Wednesday nights we've got I've never had as dedicated of adults, I don't think, as I do now. I've had some really dedicated adult groups in the past, but this one's big, but also just always consistently there.
Yeah.
Ready to work with these kids.
That's a beautiful thing.
It really, really is. And the kids, it feels like home to them. You know, church and going away on these retreats, it just is like they're getting to spend time with their family. It's how they kind of approach it. So
nice.
It makes it a lot of fun. So.
Super. Yeah, that's good.
But with that means I have heard about half of the sermon.
Well,
so you're going to have to kind of give me the rest of it.
I'll be happy to share with you.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to share with you. Let's do that. So in this season of Lent, I think there's going to be 6 total sermons in this series. And so we're talking about 2, 3 will be this weekend. And so what I'm doing, the book of the Gift of Empathy, which some of our classes are also doing as a study, is just a resource for me. I am actually pulling stories of Jesus and how he demonstrated empathy. And so this week was a good one. And so what I'll do is I'll just read, because the texts are shorter. They're not like extended. So I think it's good for our context for me to do this, particularly and as I read it, what I want our listeners to listen to is the order of things here, because I think it plays into it. But it says, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then it says Jesus was indignant, which we'll talk about some. And then he reached out his hand and touched the man. So notice before Jesus says anything, he touches the man. And we'll talk about the significance of that in a second. And then he says, I am willing, he said, be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. And Jesus then sent him away with this warning, don't tell anybody. But it was just too good news. It was just too good to share.
Yeah.
And so the man did go out and he talked freely about it. And as a result, it says that Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. And so, as I said, this story, is about love coming close. And leprosies, and I think a lot of people know this. But we know a lot about leprosy now.
Yeah. Highly contagious disease.
Well, it's not highly contagious.
Oh, it's not?
No.
I thought it was.
Yeah, you get it from armadillos, or you can get it from armadillos. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah, people get leprosy from armadillo. But, it is treatable, and we don't have leper colonies anymore. But it's interesting. I think people do still, maybe because of biblical things, think that it's, and they've heard the word leper colonies. Yeah. But for a long time, I think people thought that it was highly contagious. Yeah. And what it does, people thought that it would rot your skin and stuff. But what happens is it just stops feeling in places. Oh. And so people's feet and stuff will, they don't know when they're getting hurt and they're bumping against stuff and things like that.
Kind of like neuropathy or something like that now.
I don't know. I've never had it. I've never known anybody with leprosy. You know, I mean, it's rare, but in some parts of the world, they still have it. But anyway, and so people in that day and age, they could not be around regular people. They would have to leave and go live in a colony or live off in another place. They would lose their family. They would lose their jobs, their status, all that kind of stuff. If they came close to people, they had to yell out, unclean, unclean. So it became this label that people wore. And so can you imagine how lonely that would be to be like that? And also just to miss human touch. You know, we forget how, you know, important it is.
Yeah, just even a hug or a high five, a handshake, like just those things are connectional to our like chemistry.
Right. And so, you know, it then, you know, it gets into, so that's the setting. And this man has crossed a boundary to come, you know, to see Jesus, and he's kneeling before him. He said, you know, if you're willing, heal me.
Right.
And so then the scripture tells us, and it's interesting, and I spent a good bit of time on this. The word that's used there is interesting. It says Jesus was indignant.
Yeah.
Okay, when you think about somebody being indignant, you know, it's a negative thing, right?
Yeah, like kind of a little annoyed or something
annoyed,
like that.
Angry, you know, indignant. And so that's the way it translates in several translations, but the NIV, which I used on Sunday, says that. In other translations, it says Jesus was moved with compassion. In fact, in the NRSV, which is another of my go-to translations that I use, it says he was moved with pity, which actually in my research, I don't like that. And that's why I used the NIV this week. He was indignant. So which is it? I mean, those things are miles
I was going to say very polar opposites almost, it feels like.
Different. And so I actually, it's one of those Greek words we don't have a real good English word for. And so, but it does mean something closer to indignant or angry. But so is Jesus mad and indignant towards the man coming and asking him? And it's not that at all. Yeah. It's that he is indignant and angry at the disease. He is indignant and angry at what it's caused this man, how he's to live. It's like the way we would feel if our child was being bullied. You know, it's that sort of compassion that Jesus has in his gut about that. And so the first thing he does is he reaches out and touches this man. Yeah. And so, you know, he says, okay, before he does anything, before he says anything, before he heals him, he reaches out and touches him. And I do think that is very, very significant and a great part of this study, that, you know, of this thing. But in that we see Jesus' empathy. And so the man also says, Jesus, if you are willing. And so that's an interesting way to phrase this. Not Jesus, please heal me, or Jesus, please fix me. Jesus, if you're willing. And so you have to think that this man has become this label. He's like, would you heal somebody like me? Yeah. You know, and so Jesus, by touching him, you know, shows him, you know, no, you are noticed, you are, you know, you are loved, you are worthy. And so empathy, and that kind of empathy is one of the greatest tools in dismantling shame. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I said was that, you know, for some people, shame, you know, guilt that we sometimes have, guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. I'm a bad person. And so this man is wearing this label of leper that I am bad, you know, and Jesus is saying, no, you're not, you know, you're worthy. You're, you know, so you know, Jesus then just does heal the man. And so, and from that we can kind of pull about what are the people in our lives that may be facing shame, are feeling like they're not worthy, and how can our empathy reach out to them? And, you know, empathy, as I said, you know, one of our first points, it is one of the greatest things in dismantling shame, to sit down and be with somebody and to meet them where they are, you know.
Yeah. It's actually interesting because I had a conversation with one of the youth over the weekend about this idea. Like they were feeling some sort of shame because they felt like they had to be the perfect kid all the time
Yeah.
or whatever, and just to be able to sit there and remind them that there is not perfection, that you strive for. It's doing the best you can and all that stuff, but just to kind of give them the warm touch, I guess, in some way, not necessarily like
Yeah.
a full embrace or whatever, but just to to be seen and to be noticed, like whole demeanor shifted.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just when they're like, hey, you
Yeah.
got a place right here.
And not to break any confidences or all, and sometimes when I start sharing these personal illustrations from ministry,
Yeah.
so but this has been sort of something I've watched my whole ministry.
Yeah.
That often when somebody comes in to talk to me and it makes an appointment for pastoral counseling or whatever, they'll talk about something and it has moved into shame. It's something they feel really guilty about, and they've become that thing, and it's just like, okay, you did something bad, all right, now what's the next right thing to do? Not living with that label that this is who you are. It's not who you are. You did a bad thing. Let's and not that the leper had done nothing wrong.
Right.
That's
actually, I was about to say that is that sometimes it's even people assuming how other people are viewing them, and then like they're kind of trapping themselves into this comparison that they're only getting, like nobody else is.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, and the fact that Jesus was seeing him as a person. I mean, all of us have this need for people to see us as who we are, really, and not to see us as a label.
Right.
Right. I mean, and I'll say this, as a preacher, there's lots of times, and as a person who works at church, there's assumptions that people may make about you.
Sure.
And it can be good things, but it also can be bad things, just because based on people they've known like you in the past. And so no one, that doesn't feel very good. It doesn't feel very good.
The amount of times when like you're out to eat with somebody who's like new, or like it's just like a random time, and they're like, oh, so what do you do? And you go, I'm a pastor. They're like, oh, I'm sorry, I cussed earlier or whatever. And it's
right, yeah,
it's all good.
And so, we want to get past those labels and shame. But getting back, back down into the crux of, this sermon, one of the things with empathy, and as we're through this sermon series and through this book study, trying to grow in our empathy, one of the things that I stressed was that real empathy is down with the level, touching the people, maybe not physically touch, but being with the person, listening to them, engaging with them, hearing their stories. And that's been a emphasis through that, is everybody has a story, and a lot more people are walking around with shame than I mean, we realize that, but there are people all around us every day that are dealing with that. And so if we want to practice the empathy, and we want to be like Jesus and, practice his way, real empathy doesn't shout advice out. It offers presence.
Yeah.
And so often we, as human beings, like to kind of stand apart, look at somebody's situation and give advice rather than listen to the person.
Yeah.
And so we'll see somebody who may really be hurting, and we'll say to the addict, they just need to sober up.
Yeah.
Or we'll say to the the person who's struggling with depression or grief, they just need to get happy, they need to get strong. So it's real easy for us to look at a situation and try to fix it rather than showing our presence and being with the person.
Yeah, just kind of sitting with them in it, not necessarily being whatever the situation is with them, but more like, I'm here to hand in hand walk with you through it, or something like that. I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, I think so. I think so as well. I told a story in church on Sunday, and it's kind of a story you might even have heard it before. I don't know if you've heard that part of the sermon, but the story I opened with was a story that a very famous preacher named Fred Craddock tells. And, I've used that story before, and about every preacher I've ever known, 'cause it's such a great story, has used that at one time or another. But it's about when Fred was had taken like a weekend. He taught at Candler at Emory in Atlanta, and so he and his wife had gone up for the weekend and had we're having breakfast in Gatlinburg, and this guy came into the restaurant, and he was a really friendly guy, and everybody seemed to know him, and so he locked on to Fred there as a new person and came over and started having a conversation with him, and so he learns that Fred is a preacher. And so he says, I've got a great preacher story to tell you. And then he tells his story. He says, I grew up in poverty, not too far from here. And my mother was an unwed mother. I was born out of, wedlock. I never knew my father. And so I wore this label, my entire young life. I wore this label. The kids at the school had a name for me that I can't say on the podcast and couldn't say in church, but you can guess what it was. And it's what everybody, and then when he would go into town, he would feel like all eyes were on him, and he grew up in kind of a different era. And so it really was something that people would shame people with back then, even though he was, he had no fault in, how he was born. So he had heard that this new preacher had come to town and that everybody liked him. So he decided he would go see him and he go to a service. So he went in late, so he didn't have to see anybody, and, sat in the back, and then he would leave early before the benediction. Well, one week he just kind of got swept up in it, and suddenly the benediction had happened, and everybody was going out, and so he's kind of panicked, and he's trying to get out, and the preacher eyes him. I guess the preacher had seen him slipping in, and said, came up to him and said, "Hey, who are you? Who are you? Whose boy are you?" And so he said, when he said that, his heart just kind of sunk because, okay, here it comes again. And then he looked at him really close and said, "You know what? I know who you are. The resemblance is amazing. I can see exactly whose boy you are. You are God's child. You are God's child. I can see the resemblance in your face." And so he said, "Preacher, that changed my life. That changed my life." And so, I think it's on us as Jesus saw the leper, and as we see other people that we might have a tendency to label, is to see people who they are and to, receive them, right where they are and love them. And, and that's can bring about healing for people and change
people. Absolutely. And I think the earlier point of that, it's not about fixing the situation or giving advice, which I think a lot of us feel a pressure when we approach somebody and they bring up hard things that we have to stop and we have to fix it for them, or that that's the way that we actually show compassion. When I don't know, I guess the further I've been in my life and my ministry, that I actually think that's the case anymore, where I used to get really in the trenches a lot with stuff, and I still will, in situations that call for it. But I've learned a lot more that it's just about walking through these hard times with somebody. That's what shows the most empathy, but also support is, I think we all have to walk through some of these hard times in our life. The beautiful part is when there's somebody empathetic enough to walk with you.
Right. Yeah. And that was, that's an excellent segue to really what my final point was, that there is a risk in being close. To do that, to practice the way of Jesus, to be empathetic like that, it's going to cost us something. It's going to cost us time. It's going to cost us patience. Depending on what the situation is, it could even cost things like reputation. And so, Jesus took a risk because they didn't know much about leprosy back then, so him touching it and becoming unclean himself, I mean, that's a huge risk. And so, when we look at people in our life and people that might come across our path, if we're going to practice the way of Jesus, sometimes there's going to be a big risk. And so I had challenged the people, and actually in the benediction, which I'm sure you didn't see because at the very end of the service, I said, now that I've mentioned it, those people are going to come across our paths. but it's going to be the neighbor that you don't get along with. It's going to be the coworker that is just annoying and everybody, avoids. It's going to be the family member whose life's choices you don't quite understand. So how are we going to meet them where they are and take the risk to listen to them and to hear their story and to be a conduit of God's love and God's grace so that person might be healed. We'll get into a little bit more of that this week more with the hard part of empathy because, sometimes we think of empathy as always being nice. Well, sometimes empathy has to tell the truth.
Yeah.
And so that's what we'll be looking at this week. But there is a risk. It's going to at least cost us time, but it may cost us other things as well.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking time, you're talking energy, but also, sometimes you get emotionally invested and can get hurt as well.
Right.
But that doesn't mean, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it,
Right. Yeah. And it's having those appropriate boundaries of knowing where we end and the other person begins, and not necessarily trying to fix them, but to be with them, and in that is where I think healing and grace can come.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, I appreciate the time and energy you put into doing all of these sermons, and they're very challenging, and I think that's good. I think we need to be people who are constantly looking at what can we do, but be real and honest of how that could impact positive, and it could hurt sometimes. To be Jesus to people who might not be ready for
that. And I think the more you look at Jesus, I think he personifies empathy. I think I mentioned on the first podcast that we did on this, there has been a little bit of a movement, and I think there's a book out about toxic empathy and all stuff like that. And there's definitely boundaries and stuff, but I think some people have used that as excuse just to be mean and not care.
Yeah.
And that is not the Jesus that I read about in the Gospels.
Absolutely.
Empathy is not being weak. In fact, empathy takes a great deal of courage and bravery to really practice. And so. Yeah, so we'll continue on this week with another look at a story from Jesus' life and his ministry, and so look forward to that on Sunday.
Sounds good. Good. Well, guys, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for just rocking with us for, I don't even know what episode number we're on at this point, but it's we got to be coming up on other milestones at some point.
Yeah, I need to look as it comes up. I think we passed 150, haven't we? Yeah, so we're going to be getting close to 200. So wow, yeah.
It's been a lot of fun, and again, we just thank you for constantly being here and giving us a reason to keep doing it.
Yeah,
so,
it's great.
If you have any comments, drop it below in the chats or the comment section on the Facebook, the YouTube, wherever you take this in. And Dave, you got anything to add?
No, I just hope to see people soon. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you in church, or at least following us online. So,
absolutely.
God bless.
God bless you guys. We'll catch you guys next time. Take care.